Hello and welcome to episode 4, which is titled Entity Types and Entity Occurrences. Now, this entire episode is going to focus on the different entity types and entity occurrences, and wherever it's obvious, I'm just going to refer to these two options as entity. Now, what is an entity occurrence or an entity type? Well, to answer that question, we need to look at what an entity is first. Now, when developing a relational database, we are working with entities and relations between these entities. And so, an entity is something that we wish to keep information about. And as an example, this might be a customer, or an employee, or an article of sale. What we decide to keep information about is up to the organization that we're working for and the developer that's creating the database. But there are a few guidelines to creating entities, and this starts with a simple idea that every entity should be a noun and by extension has an independent existence so that it can be easily differentiated from other objects and entities. An entity might be a physical thing or a person, such as a lecturer and a student, or it might be an abstract thing, such as a job or a course. Now, on top of these physical or abstract entities, there's also a further divide when it comes to entities, and that is if they are weak or a strong entity. What I mean by this is if they are dependent on something else or not. Now, let me give you an example of this. Let's say you create an entity that's a customer. We're going to do this here. So we're going to create an entity here. It's going to be this box, and it's customer. Oh my god, my penmanship is horrid. Right, there we go. We got a customer. Now, we are going to give this one a primary key. That's, let's say, it's going to be social security number. I'm just going to abbreviate like that. Now, this is considered an independent entity since it does not need to reference any other entity to get its own primary key. So this entity is independent. Now, on the other hand, let's say we create two more entities here. We're going to create one here, like so, and then we're going to have it connect to another entity over here, like so. Now, we're going to name these ones, let's say, we're going to have a sale here, and an employee here. There we go. Now, because, and I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself here, but because these two are many-to-many relationships, and we're going to be speaking a lot more about this later, we need to actually split them up. But before we do that, we're going to give them each a primary key. So here we're going to give it the primary key of article number, like so. There we go. And here we're going to be primary key, we'll do employee ID. There we go. So we got two primary keys and we got a connection between. But like I said, these are non-combative and these are non-comparison relationships. So we're going to remove the one in between, and we're going to make a new entity down here that we're going to run both of them to. So it'll run like this and this. Now this is going to be a sale occurrence. Run out of space there. a sale occurrence. And here actually the primary key is it's gonna be a weak entity because it's dependent on both sale and employee. So the primary key here will be it's gonna be a combination of these two. So it'll take the employee ID over here and the article number over here. And both of these is gonna link into sale occurrence as primary keys and foreign keys. So what we mean by this is that because sale occurrence doesn't stand on its own and is dependent on these other two entities, employee and sale, to function, it's a weak entity. Now let's remove this. There we go. We're gonna put this back here. So, alright, so when you're choosing an entity to create, it's important to go through a few steps in selection. And these are as follows. Apart from the entity being a noun, you'd want to make sure that the entity can be clearly identifiable. So a customer has a social security number as a primary key. It's easily identifiable by that, or it can be it might be I don't know, an email address, a mobile phone number, whatever. A sale has an article number. It might even have a transaction ID. An employee has their employee ID or social security number. And these are all clearly identifiable entities. Now, the next step is, are you able to describe the entity in an easy to understand manner for the customer? So let's say I sit down and I'm speaking, we're gonna do this. It'll look better. It's all connected now. Everybody's happy. So we're gonna sit down with the customer that's ordered this database, and we're gonna try to explain to them what we're doing here. Right? We got a customer, and they're gonna be making or buying something through a sale, and the employee is gonna be facilitating that sale. So, can we easily describe this to the customer? The answer to this is, of course, yes. I think any customer that has a sale-oriented business is going to be able to understand our database here. Now, the third thing you need to make sure when you're choosing an entity is that there is going to be information or data that's associated with the entity. If there is no data, then obviously we do not need that entity, since we're not going to be storing any information in it. Now, the next thing we're going to look out for is the entity going to occur more than once in the database? As in, will it actually be used? We obviously, in our little database that we have here, we're going to be using customers, sale, and employee pretty much all the time, every day. But if you have an entity that's not going to be used, maybe you have an entity called moving in. For some reason you've chosen to include that entity in your database, then it's not going to be used more than once, and so you should really not put your energy and focus on including that entity, and it can just be scrapped. Now, the fifth thing that we look for is if the entity is obvious for the organization or the business that the database is meant for. What I mean by this is that if we have a business that, let's say, focuses on selling stuff, then maybe we don't really need to have entities that focus on renting stuff. So you should make sure that all of the entities that you've chosen actually line up with the purpose of the company itself. And then the last thing we want to check with our entities is to not include entities that are results of other entities. And so what I mean by this is that you do not want to have duplicate entities. You do not want to have for instance, let's say one that says customer and one that says business customer and one that says private customer. You do not want 3 of these entities, you want them all in one and the same entity. Otherwise they're going to be duplicates. Now, always remember that it's better to leave an entity in place for the conceptual model than what it is to remove it. Now, if you are pitching your idea to the organization or the actors that they've chosen to represent the company, they will tell you if the entity is not clear enough or not needed. But also make sure that you're not giving them too many entities that are not needed, or it will look unprofessional. Now, walking through this list will help you in understanding what entities to keep and what to throw away. Okay, so let's go back to an entity type and entity occurrences and what they might be. So here we have the entity called employee. Now, the actual employee is our entity type. It tells us what type of entity is located within our table or chart. So when we look at a single table and it says employee, we instantly recognize that as, oh, here we're going to find all of our employees in the company. And that is therefore an entity type. Now, an entity occurrence is if we're going to go into an SQL database and pull out the information for, let's pick it up here. We pull out the information here and we have the ID here, and it's ID 1. We have a name here and it's Maria, and her phone number is I don't know, 00000000001. Right. So here we got one entity occurrence. So an entity occurrence, or as some call them, tuples, is when you pull out a single occurrence of your entity within that table. So you want to see who Maria is and what ID she has, so you pull out her ID, which is number 1. All right, what phone number does she have? Well, let's go in and see in our entity occurrence, and then you pull her up and you see, oh, she has the phone number 000000001. Now, there is going to be an entity occurrence for each row or tuple that's going to be within our entity type. For the most part, when we're talking about entities, we are talking about the entity type, but sometimes it can be useful to reference an entity occurrence as well. The context is often enough clear to those who are following the conversation, and so further on we will not make much difference between these two. But it's good to know the difference all the same, since it'll probably come up if you sit down and talk with your customer. And with that being said, we're going to end the episode right here, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.